Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My presentation provides an overview of climate variability and climate change in the eastern succulent Karoo and the southern Nama Karoo of South Africa. This is the first presentation of the special session on the impacts of climate variability and climate change on extensive livestock production systems in this region, with two examples of possible solutions. This diagram sets the scene for the three impact pathways. First, the impacts on rangeland and pasture plant composition, productivity and quality, which in turn is driven by climate and carbon dioxide, land degradation, land use change, and stocking density and grazing management. Second, there are direct impacts on animal growth and health, driven by heat intensity and duration, nutrition stress, water availability, pests, diseases, and predators. Third, livestock production systems are impacted by extreme weather events such as floods, extreme heat, droughts, and extreme cold, frost, and snow. Recovery depends on many factors, including the rate of mortality and reproduction and the severity of soil erosion. In this special session, we will primarily address those factors highlighted in red font. Climate variability and climate change are key drivers of ecological, agricultural, and social changes in the Karoo. The agricultural economy and livelihoods based on livestock production will be impacted by shifts in rainfall and temperature regimes and other aspects of climatic change. A better understanding of climate change in the Karoo is needed to inform on-farm management, adaptation, and sectoral planning. The aim of this paper is to provide an overview of current knowledge on past and projected future climate in the eastern succulent Karoo and the southern Nama Karoo of South Africa. This informs a high-level assessment of likely risks and impacts on extensive livestock production systems and sets the scene for the following papers. The paper then closes with some thoughts on research needs. The study area is characterized by a mosaic of 4 biomes, namely the southern part of the Nama Karoo, shown in orange on this map, the eastern part of the succulent Karoo, shown in purple, which in turn contains areas of fynbos and renosterveld at higher elevation, shown in green, and small patches of Albany thicket in the Little Karoo, shown in blue. My focus is on the Western Cape province, but with consideration of the adjacent Northern and Eastern Cape provinces. In this presentation, I will occasionally refer to the Little Karoo, which lies south of the Swartberg mountain range, the Central Karoo, which lies north, and the Rain Shadow Karoo, which lies in the western part of the study region. The map insert indicates that mean annual temperatures vary from mild in the west along the Swartberg Mountains and in the high elevation areas of the northeast, to hot in other parts of the Central and Little Karoo. The diversity of biomes and veld types is not explained by annual rainfall, which is consistently low at less than about 300 millimeters per year. There are small areas of somewhat higher rainfall on the slopes of the Swartberg and other mountains and in the northeast. Of considerably higher importance is the diversity and the gradients of rainfall seasonality. The lower map by Professor Schulze indicates the predominance of very late summer rainfall, shown in light blue, with the western parts of the Rain Shadow Karoo shifting towards winter rainfall, shown in medium blue, and the southern parts in the Little Karoo receiving rainfall throughout the year, with peaks in autumn and spring, shown in dark blue. However, there are no clear agreed boundaries between the 3 rainfall seasonalities, as indicated in the upper map by Fitchett et al. In the areas shown in green, orange, and yellow, there is less than 50% consensus between researchers regarding seasonality. In the grey area, the rainfall seasonality is completely disputed. This difficulty is likely caused by the very low annual rainfall and the very high variability of rainfall between years and over decadal scale cycles. Interannual variability of rainfall also shows a gradient across the study area. A lower variability of around 30% characterizes the southern and western parts, in other words, the succulent Karoo, while a high variability of around 40 to 50% and sometimes more than 50% is seen in the Nama Karoo. The scientific literature has documented the importance of more predictable rainfall for the succulent flora, while this is not required by the Karoo subshrubs. Livestock production systems are based on, firstly, cattle, mainly in the higher rainfall and more grassy veld of the northeast, goats, which predominate in the eastern areas, sheep, which have the highest numbers and are farmed across the Nama Karoo, game species, which are replacing small stock in the drier western regions, and ostriches in the Little Karoo. Over the last 5 decades or so, sheep, goat, and ostrich numbers have significantly decreased, whereas cattle numbers have been relatively stable and game numbers are increasing. Researchers, including Dr. Beatrice Conradi and others, have identified market factors, land use change, and livestock disease, and specifically avian influenza in ostriches, as the primary drivers of these trends. The role of climate shifts is so far still inconclusive. I turn now to the evidence for recent historical climate trends. There has been a significant warming trend in the study area since 1931, amounting to more than 0.2 degrees Celsius per decade, which is faster than many other parts of South Africa and the world. Analysis also shows that the number of warm nights and hot days has increased, and the number of cold nights and cool days has decreased significantly. Similar trends have been found for daily maximum and minimum temperature. Total annual rainfall since 1921 has shown a significant positive trend across the region and into the adjacent parts of the Northern Province and the Eastern Cape Province. These amount to 5 to 10 millimeters per decade or more. The trend can be ascribed to increases in rainfall in summer in the Central Karoo and increases in winter in the Little Karoo, as shown in the smaller maps on the right. Looking at rainfall trends more closely, it is clear that heavy rainfall events have been increasing. The number of days per annum with rainfall above 10 millimeters, above 20 and above 25 millimeters have all increased in this area, driven by increases in these variables in summer in the Central Karoo and in winter in the Little Karoo. Numerous climate modelling studies are available in South Africa, which use various sets of global circulation models, emissions scenarios, and timeframes. Here I present only examples of model outputs where there is good agreement between the various studies. There is relatively good model agreement on projected future changes in mean annual temperature. We can expect a lower rate of warming along the southern coast and parts of the Little Karoo of about 1.5 to 2.2 degrees Celsius by the mid-century. In the interior regions of the Nama Karoo, a higher rate of warming is expected of about 2.4 to 3 degrees Celsius. Similar trends are found for daily maximum and minimum temperature. This warming is expected to lead to a rise in the number of very hot days, defined here as hotter than 35 degrees Celsius. In the study region, the models used here project an increase of 10 to 50 days per annum. There will also be fewer cold days per annum, defined as colder than 6 degrees Celsius. The models used here project a decrease of more than 30 such days. This slide shows the projected additional number of hot days for 3 weather stations in the study area for every month of the year. While the grey bars denote historical number of hot days, the red bars denote the expected additional number of hot days per month. In the summer months, the whole area could experience up to 6 additional hot days. The relative increases in autumn and spring months are also high. Future projections of rainfall are highly complex and depend on the models, the scenarios, and the time periods used. Importantly, we will experience continued cycles of wetter and drier years for the next 20 to 30 years. But by the mid-century, most of the models show decreased rainfall, and this message strengthens towards the end of the century. The models also indicate more frequent dry years and consecutive dry years. Until the 2050s, and/or with a scenario of strong reductions of greenhouse gas emissions, some models show increasing rainfall, particularly in the northeast. However, the increases are low and are likely to be offset by increased evaporation due to higher temperatures. The historical trend of more frequent heavy rainfall events, especially in the northeast, linked to increases in summer convective storms, appears to continue into the future. The 3 example weather stations, representing predominantly winter rainfall at the top, late summer rainfall in the middle, and year-round rainfall at the bottom, all share the same modelling outcomes for future rainfall. The multiple models used in this analysis indicate a possibility of both wetting and drying, generally by small amounts of less than 10 millimeters per annum. In the northeast, as shown in the map below, A recent multi-model analysis indicates possible wetting of 10 to 20 millimeters per annum by the mid-century. Grazed and browsed rangelands and dryland planted pastures in this region are expected to respond to climate change in complex ways, driven by, firstly, changes in rainfall amount, seasonality, variability, and intensity, by increasing frequency and length of dry spells and droughts, by more frequent and extended very hot periods, and by rising atmospheric CO2 concentrations. In interaction with, firstly, felt types and composition, the types and densities of animals, the grazing and browsing intensity and season, and land use changes. Strong impacts will likely be event-driven, in other words, pulses, and sequences of events. Fluctuating or permanent biome shifts are possible, although the potential effects of CO2 are still uncertain. A study in 2013 showed a possible long-term southeastward expansion of the desert biome into the Nama and succulent Karoo biomes. Equally, a southwestward expansion of the Nama Karoo into the succulent Karoo and fynbos biomes was projected. A critical factor is likely to be the changing cover and biomass of annual and perennial grasses, with direct implications for livestock farming potential and drought resilience. All the currently available evidence points to a complex set of climate-related drivers in the study area over the short to long term. The areas numbered 1 to 5 on this map will be briefly summarized in the next slide. Number 1 in the northeast summer rainfall area, increasing grass and possibly shrub cover and net primary productivity, with cattle herds stable to increasing, vulnerable to drought, extreme heat, and high rainfall events. Secondly, Eastern Cape, which is also a summer rainfall area, with various possible shifts occurring, but vulnerable to drought and extreme heat, with heat stress on small stock. In the Prince Albert area, which is also summer rainfall, various possible shifts, irrigated agriculture possibly becoming more vulnerable, and possible shifts back to small stock, impacts on succulent species, but mountains providing niches. In the Western Cape, which is a more winter rainfall area, possible drying and increased rainfall variability with impacts on succulent species, nutritional pressure on small stock, and a continued shift to game, and a lack of water. In the Little Karoo, the all-year rainfall area, western parts possibly drying, and increased rainfall variability and extreme heat with impacts on succulent species, increased woodiness and thicket, but also mountains providing niches, irrigated agriculture possibly becoming more vulnerable, and heat stress on ostriches. Given what we know and our knowledge gaps, I suggest the following research questions. Are the rainfall seasonality boundaries shifting? Are these changes pulses, in other words fluctuating, or are they permanent? How responsive are succulent and grass species relative to subshrubs across the region's climatic gradients? Are the eastern areas providing higher NPP for grazers? And are these changes pulses or permanent? Are the western areas declining, replacement of succulent Karoo by Nama and or desert? What are the impacts of rising CO2 on MPP, on composition, example, woody and thicket increases, grasses versus shrubs, across the region's climatic gradients? And what is the resilience of large and small stock species and breeds, in other words, genetic factors, to excessive heat? I thank you for your attention.
Good day, everyone. I'm Nelmarie Simon, a rangeland scientist at the Western Cape Department of Agriculture. In this presentation, I'll tell you about the impact of the drought on the vegetation of the Nama Karoo and succulent Karoo. South Africa experiences different levels of drought over the past 8 or more years, depending on where you are. Everybody knows of Cape Town's near day zero, and now PA and surrounds in the Eastern Cape is close to it. A simple definition of drought is a shortage of rain over a long period of time. It differs from other natural disasters in that its impact is not seen as quickly as that of floods or fire, for example. 4 types of drought were identified. First, a meteorological drought, that is basically the shortage of rain. If it persists, and the evaporation and transpiration increases, resulting in a decrease in soil water that leads to plant stress and lower plant production, you get an agricultural drought. If the water shortage continues, rivers and streams stop running, dams dry up, resulting in an hydrological drought. And all this has an impact on the people that lives in the area and depends on it for their livelihoods. That is a socio-economic drought. The extensive farming areas of the Western Cape are still burdened by a drought and are experiencing all of these mentioned types of drought. Parts of the summer rainfall Namakuru between Laingsburg, Beaufort West and Murraysburg experienced a drought during the early 2000s, and the area as a whole again from 2015, with the driest year in 2019. It was more severe towards the west in the area known as the Cape between Laingsburg and Prince Albert. Here you can see how the vegetation changes from 2014, a year with above average rainfall, to 2017 to 2020. This is in the Cape area. Animal numbers were kept very low, and in 2019 there were almost no animals in this camp. The rainfall of the Namakuru is unpredictable and droughts are common. The more biodiverse succulent Karoo in general receive reliable winter rainfall and seldom experience a disaster drought. They received below average rainfall since 2015, and from 2017 to 2019 less than 50% of their long-term average annual rainfall. The drought in the succulent Karoo was thus more severe in terms of annual rainfall than in the Namakuru over the same period of time. Both the Namakuru and succulent Karoo are mainly used for extensive livestock and game farming, and the people depends on the rangelands for their livelihood. The focus of this presentation will be on the first two types of drought, namely meteorological and agricultural drought, and show the reaction and relative sensitivity of the vegetation of both biomes to drought. The study was done in the Western Cape on 10 farms in the succulent Karoo, specifically the Rain Shadow Valley Karoo, the green area on the map, excluding the Tankwa Karoo area and further north. For this study, we'll focus on the area adjacent to the Nama Karoo of the Western Cape. The Rain Shadow Valley Karoo is the largest of the 6 bioregions in the succulent Karoo, and its vegetation consists mainly of succulents and dwarf shrubs, with grasses less common. In the Nama Karoo, we did surveys on 14 farms, of which 8 was in the lower Karoo bioregion, the pink area on the map, and 6 in the upper Karoo bioregion, the blue area. The lower Karoo is the smallest of the 3 bioregions of the Nama Karoo and at the lowest altitude, whereas the upper Karoo is the largest bioregion. The vegetation of the Nama Karoo consists mainly of dwarf shrubs and grasses, which are more common in some areas than others, especially in the sandy areas of the western lower Karoo, and some succulents are also present in this biome. The upper Karoo has the highest average annual rainfall of the 3 bioregions, while the lower Karoo and Rain Shadow Valley Karoo has similar rainfall. The Rain Shadow Valley Karoo has the least frost days, namely 16, followed by the lower Karoo with 25 days and the upper Karoo with 45 days per year. Repeated plant surveys were done in the winters of 2016 and 2019 in the succulent Karoo and the autumns of 2017 and 2020-21 in the Nama Karoo. The second surveys in the Nama Karoo was in 2 different years due to the COVID regulations and the hard lockdown in April 2020. At each site, a permanently marked 1,000-meter line transect was surveyed using the line point method, identifying perennial species to species level if possible, and also ephemerals as a group at each point. In the absence of plants, the cover of plant litter, dung and rocks were recorded, and if those were also absent, bare ground was recorded. The transect was laid out along a distance from water point grading, starting at 50 meters from the water point, ending at 1,000 meters from the water point. In the case of the Namakuru, only 500 points were done over the 1,000 meters, where there was a 100-meter gap between every 100 points. Only 500 points was done in the Namakuru because it was found in previous studies as sufficient to detect changes in the vegetation of this biome. Partial canonical correspondence analysis for paired plots was used to assess changes in the direction as well as the magnitude of species composition change over time in each biome. Paired t-tests were used to assess changes in cover components, growth forms, and palatability classes. We found that the species composition changes significantly from 2016 to 2019 in the succulent karoo, with 15% of the species lost over time. In the Namakuru, there was also a significant change in species composition from 2017 to 2020-21. Here the dashed lines indicate the change from 2017 to 2020 for mostly the upper Karoo farms, and the solid lines is the changes in the lower Karoo bioregion surveys. The Namakuru only had a 3% loss in species. There was a significant decrease in the plant cover in the succulent Karoo and in the lower Karoo bioregion of the Namakuru. There was an increase in bare ground in the Namakuru of 6.6%, and it was significant in the lower Karoo with 12.6% increase, while it didn't change significantly in the upper Karoo or the succulent Karoo. Dead plants and litter increased significantly in the succulent Karoo during the drought. The increase in the litter in the succulent Karoo is most probably the reason for the decrease in the bare ground in this area. In the succulent Karoo and Namakuru, the cover of both dominant growth forms, namely subshrubs and succulent, declined significantly over time. The decline in the succulents are most probably because of the drought, as it is less palatable plants that are not preferred by animals. Hoffman and others found that especially shallow-rooted succulents die because of drought. Similar to our study, Milton and others found in Statlerville in the Namakuru that drought had a larger impact on the subshrubs than the succulents. In the Namakuru, the cover of the dominant subshrubs decreased mainly because of a decline in Pensia incana, Rossinia oppositifolia, and Chrysocoma ciliata, while in the succulent Karoo, it was mainly due to a decrease in Tyronia oblanceolata, Chrysocoma ciliata, and Gallenia africana. In the Namakuru, there was a significant shift from palatable species, such as Pensia incana and Staphygrostis obtusa, to unpalatable species, and this is mainly due to an increase in the grasses Aristida atsynsionis and Enipogon desvauxi, and here you can clearly see the change from 2017, where there was very few plants present, to 2020, and similar with Enipogon. It was mainly on the farm surveyed in 2020 in the upper Karoo that received good rainfall in early summer of that year, when grasses are most responsive to rainfall. According to one of the farmers in the upper Karoo, they did not receive good rains during March in the last couple of years, even though the annual rainfall was about average. And that is the reason for the decrease in Pensia incana in particular. Other studies, including that of Milton and others in the Statlerville area, also found a decrease in Pensia incana due to the drought. In the succulent Karoo, there was a significant decline in the highly palatable species, such as Osteospermum sinuatum and Tyronia oblanceolata. The unpalatable subshrub, Chrysocoma ciliata, significantly declined in abundance in both biomes during the drought, as you can clearly see here how it changed from 2016 to 2019, 2017 to near absent in 2020. Another unpalatable species that decreased due to the drought was Gallina africana, specifically in the succulent karoo. It actually had a slight increase in the Nama karoo, and that's most probably because the drought was not that severe in the Nama karoo as it was in the succulent karoo. Hoffman and others also found a decrease in Gallina africana and Osteospermum sinoatum in the succulent karoo due to the drought. Both biomes showed changes in vegetation composition, and it appears that succulents and certain subshrub species are more sensitive to extended droughts, and as if the less valuable species are more adapted to survive droughts, with a few exceptions as mentioned. Combined with a lower plant cover, the extended drought resulted in a decrease in the agricultural production potential of both biomes. Positive in this is that there are now space for new plants to establish after the drought, but then the valuable species should still be present in the landscape. Otherwise, not only the agricultural production potential will decrease, but also the biodiversity, as fewer species will be present. The species surviving the drought and those that can establish after the drought will determine how the area will react to climate change, with the prediction of more unreliable rainfall in the future. In conclusion, the succulent karoo, where the winter rainfall is predictable and prolonged droughts are very rare, was more negatively affected by a very severe drought. The vegetation of the Nama karoo, on the other hand, where prolonged droughts are more common, is more adapted to drought and might be less impacted by climate change. We'll only be able to see in the coming years how the vegetation reacts to rainfall after the drought and if it recovers or not. Thank you for your time.
Good day, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to be able to talk to you in this way. My name is Karl Kluter, and I'm also addressing you on behalf of my colleague Tertius Brandt and our students Nelius Nell and Shannon Stein. My topic for today is future climatic instability, the assessment of environmental stressors in sheep. Well, I don't think I need to convince you that we expect more extreme weather conditions in future, and the expected climate change in Southern Africa will see that we have a rise of temperature, especially in the central parts of the country, and then also quite drier in the western parts of the country. One might ask, why do we consider sheep as the target species? Now, sheep is the most diverse mammalian livestock species, and they are able to adapt to marginal conditions. They also play an important role both for commercial and smallholder farmers. Now, if you look at the left-hand graph here from the review from John and Tina Rust, with temperature on the x-axis, you'll see that sheep are actually able to tolerate quite a high temperature together with goats, so they're able to be present when temperatures are quite high. And then the right hand side, you'll see precipitation is on the x-axis. You'll see that sheep are actually quite robust with regards to precipitation. They're able to hold their own under conditions of low precipitation, medium, and as well as high precipitation. When we talk about heat conditions, firstly we are going to say something about breed effects, and this was studied in a wide array of South African breeds. We have wool and dual-purpose breeds, namely the Merino, the Dooney Merino, the S. Mutton Merino, then also terminal sire breeds represented by the Dormer, and then meat breeds with indigenous parentage, the Dorper and the Meatmaster, and then an indigenous fat-tail breed in the Makwa Africana. We assessed them early in the morning under relatively mild conditions of about 19 degrees of centigrade, and then in the noon during hotter conditions at about 30 degrees of centigrade. Now, if we look at this, you'll see the breeds down here and the respiration rate on this axis, and you'll see that in the morning when it's cooler at about 19 degrees of centigrade, there's not really a marked difference between the respective breeds. However, this situation changed quite markedly if we assess them during the hotter afternoons. So you'll see the breeds from more temperate regions, namely the Dormer, the Esmat Merino, the Merino, and the Tuni, that their respiration rate is about more than 3 times higher during hot conditions. Then the Dorper, which is about 50-50 indigenous and from temperate regions, it's just below 3 times. And the Meatmaster, which is more indigenous, is just over double the respiration rate in the morning, while the Namakwa Afrikaner is not even double the respiration rate in the morning. So you'll see the origin of the breeds has quite a marked effect on how they react to the hotter conditions in the afternoon. So we also looked a bit at between U and re-ranking effects, and we found the repeatability of about 18%. But we also included the random U by time of day interaction effect, just to account for the re-ranking that may happen between U's. And the updated parameters gave us low repeatability and then also re-ranking effect that was quite substantial at 28% of the observed variation. So when we conclude about this study, we saw that the respiration rate markedly increased under hotter conditions, and we also observed quite marked breed differences. And we can conclude that adapted localized livestock might cope better under a challenging climate in terms of heat, and the respiration rate could help us to improve within breed heat tolerance by selection. However, we need to get a better handle on the re-ranking of use before we can really seriously do this. Then we also had a bit of a look at the effect of shade, which was studied in neonatal Esmat Merino and Dormer lambs. We used temperature and humidity sensitive probes in long white PVC pipes to prevent direct solar radiation, and they were employed under tree shade and in full sun. The data were downloaded after the lambing season and interpreted. We also looked at lamb respiration rate, determined at noon for lambs that had access to shade, and then lambs that didn't have access to shade. Here we linked these data to a daily temperature humidity index that included maximum temperature and minimum relative humidity. If we look at this graph, so we have the reading of the probe on this axis, relative humidity here, and temperature here. So you'll see that the relative humidity is inversely proportional to temperature. So you can see when the one is high, the other one is low, and vice versa. And this is the motivation for using in the temperature humidity index the maximum temperature and the minimum relative humidity. When we look at again the reading on this axis and temperature here, and then we can see the probe in the shade in blue and the probe in the sun in red, you can see the moderating influence of tree shade on temperature. So during the day, the temperature in tree shade is lower, and at night the temperature under tree shade is slightly higher than in the full sun without any form of shelter. When we look at the respiration rate of lambs, so you can see the temperature humidity index is here, and you can see there's really not much to choose at levels below around about 77, 78, and then there seemed to be a bit of a break point, and afterwards the temperature of unshaded lambs increased at a 5 times faster rate than the lambs that do have access to shade. So we can conclude that trees moderated the climate conditions for lambs born in autumn, and that lamb respiration rate was independent of temperature humidity index up to about 77, 78, and but above that the respiration rate increased 5 times faster in unshaded lambs. So we can conclude that the provision of shade benefited the behavior welfare of lambs at high temperature humidity index levels. However, I need to stress that extreme heat stress was uncommon, so we have relatively few records in this range. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we also looked at the response of sheep to cold conditions. Here we studied the effects of selection for number of lambs weaned in a winter lambing divergently selected merino resource flock. Selection was from the same base population since 1986, and there was a positive selection line of the high line. Now this line, both ewes and rams were descended from ewes that had more lambs than they had lambing opportunities. In other words, they reared twins at least once, and also they were generally not barren or lost all progeny born. In opposite, the downward selection line, or the low line, was descended from ewes that had less lambs than they had lambing opportunities. In other words, they were either barren at least once or lost all progeny born at least once. These animals were maintained in the same flock except at mating. Now, records from this flock was related to a chill index that was derived using information on wind velocity, on average temperature, and also on rainfall. And the chill index was related to early lamb mortality from birth to 3 days, as well as rectal temperature. Now, if we look, this is the chill index on this axis and then the estimated lamb mortality. So you can see that lamb mortality generally increased as it became more chilly, but the effect was much more pronounced in the low line than in the high line. So you can see that there's actually quite a huge line difference, especially at high chill levels. Now, if we have a look at this, this is again the chill index and rectal temperature over here. In the high line, the lambs were able to maintain rectal temperature quite nicely along the chill index, but in the low line there was a curvilinear response, resulting in lower rectal temperatures as it became more chilly. Ladies and gentlemen, to conclude here, we can say that cold, wet and windy conditions clearly compromised lamb survival, and selection for reproduction improved the response of lambs to the chill index. The extent to which lambs can cope with hypothermic stress seems to be controlled by genetics, but we do need further studies using larger databases, as well as more records that were recorded during inclement weather events. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this brings us to some overall conclusions and future outlook. I think that we've been able to adequately demonstrate that weather do impact on animals. And I think this study provided a solid basis for further studies on other records that may reflect climate stress. It also brought to our attention the contribution of indigenous genetic resources to this whole problem, as well as the potential of within-breed selection. There is also studies on other interventions to ease climate stress that are needed, including photovoltaic panels that might provide shade, as well as arboriculture applications, and also hedges and other structures to alleviate cold stress. Now, if we look at this, we need to interface this all with production performance, because we know that indigenous livestock sometimes lacks performance in other traits like growth and carcass quality, for instance. We also need to understand the consequences of selection for increased climate tolerance, as well as the impact of shelter providing interventions. So what is the impact of lots of photovoltaic panels going to be on the agricultural landscape, for instance? And what is the impact of arboriculture and hedges on other plant industries? Because it's not only going to compete for space, it's also going to compete for some light. So I think that it is plain to see that further research would need a substantial expansion in terms of manpower and funding. There is a possibility that some of these studies may be done on farm and not necessarily only on research farms. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this brings me to the acknowledgements. Apart from the institutions involved, I would like to acknowledge the funding received from Cape Wool's SA, as well as Red Meat Research and Development SA and the Western Cape Agricultural Research Trust. Now, this brings me to the end of my story. Thanks for listening.
Good afternoon, everybody. I would like to thank you, as well as the authors of this paper, for the opportunity to present to you this afternoon. We would like to show you that extreme temperatures compromises male and female fertility in farmed ostriches in an arid region. In the past, research has mainly focused on survival, but we know temperature has a crucial influence on defining where species can both survive or reproduce. It is unclear if temperature fluctuation constrain reproductive success or whether populations harbor the potential to respond to climatic shifts. It is crucially important then to be able to describe how natural temperature fluctuations affect investment in fertility traits, the traits being the number and the viability of eggs and sperm, or the impact it has on reproductive success. And none of this can be more important, especially now as climatic variation is expected to increase globally. This leaves us then with the following question. Do extreme temperatures have damaging effects on different fertility traits? And if so, is there the potential for selection to increase resilience to changing climates? For this study, on-site temperature records were matched with production data, firstly to investigate how thermal fluctuations shape investment in gametic traits and reproductive success. The traits include the number of eggs, the number of sperm, egg mass, as well as sperm viability, while the reproductive success were measured by hatching success and offspring numbers. Further, they were looked into individual variation in the resilience of fertility to temperature changes, also whether extreme temperatures cause trade-offs in investment across gametic traits. For this project, ethical clearance was obtained from the Western Cape Department of Agriculture. The ostrich is the world's largest farmed bird and reproduce throughout the year in tropical and subtropical regions. The trail flock consisted of about 1,300 individually marked birds in the Kleinkoor region of South Africa. All the pairs, as well as the solitary males used for semen collection, were kept in separate fenced enclosures that were exposed to natural weather conditions. Included is a photo of a breeding pair in their paddock in the veld. Data from over 20 years was analyzed to establish how temperature fluctuations affected multiple fertility traits. The fertility of both males and females was obtained by repeated monitoring within and across years of daily records that included the number and viability of eggs. Fertility of solitary males was obtained by the collection of natural ejaculates. The temperatures during the reproductive cycle ranged from between -5 to 45 degrees Celsius. The data structure of fertility traits obtained from 1998 to 2018 at the study site included for males sperm from 22 males over a period of 10 years, eggs from 552 females over a period of 21 years, and that gave us a number of over 40,000 offspring. The picture below of Africa shows the geographical range in green where ostriches can be found. The study site is marked with the asterisks. Monthly range was calculated by estimating the range of temperatures of each month and then calculating the mean of this across all months. Results clearly showed that temperature extremes did in fact compromise both male and female fertility. A deviation of 5 degrees from the 20-degree terminal optimum of female ostriches led to a reduction of about 44% in reproductive success. This is the number of chicks hatched. The number of eggs females laid and the number of sperm males ejaculated was significantly reduced by both the increase as well as decrease in ambient temperature. This can be clearly seen in the two graphs below. Meat quality was generally more resistant to temperature changes for both males and females, as conceived for females, egg mass, hatching success, and on the male side, sperm viability and the number of offsprings. Substantial variation was found among females in how resilient their laying rates were to temperature change. The differences between females can be explained by 27% of variation in the decline in egg-laying rates when temperature increase and 24% of variation when temperatures decrease. Some males were much more resilient to temperature change than others in their sperm production. Differences between males can be explained by 48% of variation in the decline in sperm production when temperature increase and another 51% of variation when temperatures decrease. Females were highly consistent in their egg mass, and this was relatively unaffected by temperature changes. Egg mass for the trial flock ranged from 1.41 to 1.68 kilograms, and the most extreme change in egg mass for temperature change from 20 to 25 degrees Celsius was an increase of 0.015 kilograms. About 50% of the variation in change in egg mass with temperature change was explained by the differences between females. About 50% of variation in change in sperm viability with temperature change was explained by differences between males. Extreme temperatures did not expose trade-offs between gametic traits. This was consistent within as well as among individuals. Changes in egg-laying rates were positively correlated to egg mass as temperatures increased both within and among females. The effects of temperature were not immediate, but resulted from a critical thermal window 2 to 4 days before laying and ejaculation. This can be seen for egg production, egg mass, number of sperm, and sperm viability. And then to conclude, thermal resilience of fertility is clearly important in determining habitat. Fluctuation in temperatures had little effect on gamete viability. Substantial variation was found among males and females in how resilient their sperm production and their laying rates were to temperature change. Females were extremely consistent in their egg mass. About 50% of the variation in sperm viability and egg mass change was explained by the differences between males and females respectively. Little evidence of trade-offs among fertility traits or resilience in fertility traits was found. Some females appeared to invest more in reproduction at higher temperatures, and this may facilitate responses to the changing climate. The results from the study show that the robustness of fertility to temperature fluctuation is a critical aspect of species survival in regions predicted to undergo the greatest change in climate. Further evolution of thermal tolerance may be possible if traits are heritable. And with this, I thank you for your attention. Included then my contact details if anybody would like some more information. Thank you and goodbye.
Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to be speaking on behalf of the list of co-authors there that you see on satellite imagery and open access online tools that support felt management. So recent years have seen rapid development in the online accessibility of free satellite imagery, which is useful in support of felt management, land use planning, and monitoring. And so this talk deals with two different approaches to this. The first based on 10-meter resolution data, the Sentinel data, with a relatively short historical archive, and that's from us in the Western Cape Department of Agriculture. And then the second part of the talk is based on a Landsat project with a much longer archive, which is presented by external researchers. So the cloud-based data and server-side processing adds to the ease of use and attractiveness of these, even to non-experts in remote sensing and GIS, as we'll see. And just as a refresher, I'm sure most of you know this already, or are familiar with the concept of MODIS data, which has a 250-meter resolution. So as you zoom in, it becomes quite blocky. Yet on a regional scale, it's still really useful for analyses at a local municipality scale and that sort of region. Whereas as we zoom in, we obviously want more detailed imagery such as Landsat at 30 meters and Sentinel at 10 meters. And of course, you even get sub-meter satellite imagery now, but that's generally quite expensive to use and highly data intensive as well. So in the background of the fourth industrial revolution, in that context, we have all this big data, which is great. But how do we take advantage of it as non-data experts? And how valuable is it to the average person if we always have to rely on specialists and experts to analyze the data? Well, farmers and their regional advisors are usually the best equipped to understand anomalies in the local veld production. With the aid of easily available satellite tools, they can then leverage this big data to better understand veld condition and trends, which hopefully will lead to better decision making. Right, so Sentinel-2 is part of the constellation of satellites in the Earth observation mission from European Union's Copernicus program. I'm not going to go through all the points in this slide. You can go back and pause and have a look later if you're interested. I just want to make 2 points from this slide. Firstly, that it's free, full and open data access, which is fantastic for us. And then the last point is that the revisit time is 5 days, which is very important when we start looking at the impact that cloud can have on optical remote sensing. Like I said in the top there, vegetation monitoring by satellite, well, maybe not on this particular day. This whole area is just covered in cloud, which means that this image isn't usable. And then that's just a reality with optical or passive remote sensing. So Sentinel Hub makes this all possible by using a different kind of cloud, the computing cloud. And this cloud provides us access to Sentinel-2 data through the Sentinel Hub, which we pay a nominal fee to access. There's some more information on that if you want to read through it later. And they basically provide an application programming interface, an API, which we then use in our own website. We build it into our own website, and it makes various tools available for us to access this cloud data and to do analyses on the cloud. So as I say, the developers can customize scripts for band processing, the multispectral bands, and visualization. So the complexities can be hidden from the end user. So you'll see once we have a look at the app, it's pretty easy to use once you've played around with it. Again, I'm going to fly through this very quickly. This is how the Sentinel Hub looks. It's basically receiving the satellite information, making it available on a cloud, running various processes on that data, and then serving it with all these lovely acronyms here, which we won't go into, to the end user on various platforms, making use of HTML5 and Esri JavaScript. Okay, I'm going to run through a short demo of the app, which I had hoped to do live, but obviously we can't do that, so I made a recording of it. And you'll see some of these concepts. I won't go through them now. You'll see them in the little video if that'll run. Right, so just a quick look at the app and the layout. And this is certainly not meant to be a tutorial. There's just simply not enough time. I just want to show you the layout and some of the controls. So you get a full screen button and a location button, which will take you to your location if your device has a GPS. I'm on a laptop, so I'm not sure. Yeah, it does more or less take you into my location. We have a calendar where we can select from a time series of imagery that we've got access to. And the base map, it'll bring you back to this selected base map if you've been working on an index. Information button just gives you some information about the imagery available. And we have a login and registration. You don't have to log in, but it's quite useful if you want to draw fields that you want to save and then return to later. Then you do have to create a login, and that's pretty straightforward. Right, base maps, you've got a choice of those options. So you could have streets. Let's go back to the satellite. And then the layers allows you to select which platform you're working on. In our case, it's going to be mainly Sentinel-2, and a whole range of indices that it'll calculate on the fly for whatever time series you select. So there we've got true color, false color, shortwave infrared, which is pretty useful for fires and burn scar detection, NDVI, enhanced vegetation index, and soil adjusted vegetation index. And I'll show you some examples of that in a while. Right, then layers, we can look at the surveyor general farm portions, the field boundaries from our flyover data. If I pop that on, you'll see each of these as a little vineyard or a wheat crop or whatever commodity was produced in, and you can use that boundary to actually encompass an area for evaluation, and it'll give you an average for that field. In most cases, as vegetation scientists, you're going to be wanting to draw your own fields most likely, and I'll quickly show you that. Just importantly, you can select your cloud cover threshold. Let's just put it on 20%, for example. And then it allows you to go to a particular location if you want to orientate yourself from some field work that you've done perhaps. It allows you to click on a particular pixel in your vegetation index to identify that. And then, as I've already mentioned, you can get your field statistics out. If you don't have pre-existing fields, you can go and draw in your zone, which we'll do. I think let's just close this and we'll go back to the satellite image and we'll go to where there's some unmapped areas. Right. So let's go and draw a little polygon. So if this is your particular area of interest, and excuse my quick and ugly drawing there, but it's just to demonstrate the process, and it'll automatically generate graphs. It's got preset defaults for NDVI. There you can see the soil adjusted vegetation index popping up. It's busy with the NDVI graph at the moment. All of these are being generated on the fly from satellite imagery in the cloud, and there you have, for that little particular area of interest, your NDVI. If you see some weird anomaly, you might see one of the points dropping right down here. You can actually, it's more than likely going to be a cloud problem. You can click on that and it'll show you the date and it'll show you a histogram, and you can basically assess what's going on there. It's more than likely an issue with cloud cover. In this case, I think we filtered this one to 20%, but there can still be issues with cloud, which you'll see in there pretty quickly. You can then very easily produce a map of that field, zoom in and produce a map, and save it to GeoTIFF and use that in your GIS or in your report subsequently. And as I said, you can save that field and go back and monitor it on a regular basis. So that's just a very quick run through of some of the functionality, but by all means go in and play around with it, and I think it's pretty intuitive. So here we've zoomed into the polygon that we just drew, and you can see the range of values if you look at the little color legend bar at the bottom. And now those values are stretched over that entire image from the maximum and minimum of the whole image. But what we can do is restrict it to that polygon so that the maximum and minimum of what is inside that polygon define your color graduation, which makes it a lot easier to interpret, as you'll see on the next slide. Here we have the maximum and minimum within that polygon. I should probably have selected a more homogeneous area, but never mind, it shows you the general principle. At the top of the slide there, you can see the time slider. And if you move that to the left, you can go back in time, and obviously to the right takes you forward in time to when we have images available that fit within our cloud threshold that we set earlier. If you look at some of the other crops, this is wheat just off the N2. You see a much neater phenology than that heterogeneous area that I selected earlier with your wheat curve. And then in a bad year like 2017, you straight away pick up that you're deviating from your normal as early as mid-year. You can start seeing the problem. Yeah, it's obviously a bit different in veld where you have sort of heterogeneous vegetation. Very, very neat when you have one crop. Okay, I'm going to hand over now to co-author Zander, who's now sitting in Oslo, hopefully online and watching. Over to you, Zander.
I'm going to present an interactive web application that's based on Landsat-derived vegetation trends. This work is based on something I published with colleagues from the University of Cape Town in the journal Ecological Indicators. We use the Landsat satellite data archive, which spans from the 1980s to present, and Landsat satellites collect information at 30 meter spatial resolution. We calculated a vegetation index for all the years going back over South Africa and looked at the trends in this vegetation index over time as a proxy for vegetation cover, productivity and vigor. We found overall net vegetation greening in South Africa. We then used repeat photography and high-resolution satellite imagery to validate these trends and also to explore what they mean in terms of land degradation and restoration. And finally, we wrapped this data up in a novel web application which allows users to explore vegetation trends using the Landsat satellite imagery at any place around the world. Using the interactive web application, users can zoom into the area of interest. In this case, I zoom into the Letaba herbivory and fire exclusion experiment. You can see the area outlined with woody cover showing fire and herbivore exclusion. Users can select the date range, the type of time series, and the geometry over which they would like to extract data. In this case, I click a point on the map, and now the application fetches Landsat imagery for this area and calculates the trend for every single pixel. And this is visualized from red showing decrease and green showing increase in EVI. Users can also click on a year in the graph, and this will visualize the corresponding Landsat mosaic for that year. You can either visualize it in red, green, and blue, or you can visualize the EVI information. And using a slider widget, users can then compare the two imagery at two different time points over the area. This is both available at a high resolution landscape scale, but also at a broader spatial extent. To give you an illustration of what the EVI trends can mean at a landscape scale or specific context, here is an example of two repeat photographs showing the expansion of woody cover in a valley and the corresponding high-resolution satellite image showing this pixel in white, and then a screenshot from the web application showing the trend in EVI, and you can see the green areas showing the expansion or increase in woody cover, and this graph is showing the trend for this corresponding white pixel. And this is an example of where increase in EVI can look like a signal of restoration, but may in fact be degradation if that's what you consider woody cover encroachment to be. Here is another two examples of change in landscape over time captured by the EVI Trend web application. The first, you can see bush cover that was cleared for the installment of cultivated fields, and you can see this corresponding signal in the EVI Trend image screenshot from the web application showing a decline in EVI over these cultivated fields where the bush cover was cleared. And this pixel in black can be seen in this graph on the right. Secondly, here is a more subtle clearing of bush for the expansion of a settlement in rural KwaZulu-Natal, and you can see both the increase in woody cover here, but the clearing of woody cover on the right side of the image. And here the pixel in white has a corresponding time series showing a gradual decline in EVI over the time series. So a web application that shows trends in EVI can be used at a local context with local knowledge about what landscape drivers are relevant and what the land management context is to interpret whether increases or decreases in EVI are signals of restoration or degradation. And the idea is that a tool like this can be employed in data-driven decision making in rangeland ecology and management within South Africa, but also anywhere else in the world, given that Landsat satellite imagery are globally available.
Well, thanks very much, Zander, for that. And I'd like to take this opportunity to also thank our other co-authors, FCA and Phil, for their inputs. So just to conclude, these are first-generation web apps harnessing enormous resources and putting them at the fingertips of researchers and land managers. And beyond felt monitoring, other potential practical applications in, for example, degradation identification, drought assessment, real-time land clearing detection, and land use change delimitation, etc., are all possible, and probably quite a few that we haven't thought of. So they have the potential to shorten the information feedback loops between planning, decision-making, implementation of interventions, and the subsequent monitoring thereof. So going forward, we'll continue to refine and develop and try and keep up with technology, and certainly welcome user feedback, particularly in the context of felt management. And there's the URLs of the two apps. So thanks for listening, and hopefully we'll see you again soon, hopefully in better circumstances. All of the best.
Good day. I'm Francis Steyn from the Department of Agriculture in the Western Cape. I'm going to speak to you today about COPE 4, the gold standard in area-wide planning. The aim of area-wide planning is to enhance community-based conservation where farmers take the lead and internalize the challenges and opportunities as a group instead of as individuals. And this is, in just 3 lines, is essential going forward to make sustainable development work. As you can see from this problem tree that came from the arid zone, it's climate change, it's vegetation, it's disaster management, it's research, it's everything that we have to look at. And if you go back to our former president, Nelson Mandela, action without vision is only passing time. Vision without action is merely daydreaming. But vision with action can change the world. And this gold standard is planning and putting action to those plans. So we want to change the world. So the present conditions of the prevailing drought in the Central Karoo and other rangeland areas in the Western Cape has been carrying on for about 5 years, and some of the farmers are on their knees. That biodiversity is especially the palatable perennial climax plants are dying, leaving large areas of soil bare and exposed to erosion. The thorn trees in the riverbeds are dying due to the drought. The animals are weak and cannot raise any lambs. The veld has nothing that can be eaten, and all vegetation is very dry and unpalatable. And then the threat of a major flood that will break this drought is very evident in everyone's mind. This is a serious situation, a disaster, and yet there is hope. Right. So if you go back to the COPE, unfortunately, there came a bit of a gremlin, as we said just now. But the COPE is one of these areas that showed that community-based natural resource management is very effective. If you look at this outline over here and you compare it to a lot of the other initiatives that we've got, it's what the farmers want and what we want as researchers and as servants to the public is very, very much the same. So this is what they're looking for. If you have a look at and pay a tribute to Piet Gous, that was, he passed away, but he was one of the implementers, the go-to people in the COPE 4 project. He said, if agriculture and all NRM role players, that's all of us, are grouped together with the farmers and have a common vision, then this is the only time you will realize sustainable development. It lets me think a lot of what Dr. Sue said this morning. You have to have an integrated approach to this. You can't just have a look at your one specific field. You have to look at the entire sustainable development. So community-based natural resource management, to effectively address many issues, we have to strive for sustainable development of land, water, and biodiversity. Planning must be conducted at a scale larger than an individual farm. It must also be conducted at everything that happens in that community, especially those things that are very specific to that community. So their priorities are very important. So the COPE 4, their priorities started with predators, and it had ended up now where they're doing value adding at this stage. So they've moved from their first priority, they've moved along to where they want to add value to their product that they're producing in that area. So community-based natural resource management, the methodology is where local people identify their concerns, they set the future vision of their home, they prioritize and they implement. And we as partners enable this vision as servants to take back. So we give them that chance and that space to make it happen. This is the COPE area. You can see Toes River, Laingsburg, Rietbon, Beaufort West. You can see from the map, it's more like a ruins area. And it comes from the hills. Have got the short shrubs that we know of in the Karoo, and then the bushman grass out in the valleys, which is like the intestines of a buck that the Sand people used to slaughter. That gives you another idea of the COPE. That's just with their logo. You can now recognize the logo and the amount of farms that are involved there. So here you can see it's 83,000 hectares, 19 farms. These are the works that we did with all the farmers. It looks like something that's very simple. But if you take it, the farmers are in charge of this project. There's not anybody in the department or in government. They're in charge of it. They determine who's going to be at the next meeting. They determine their values. They determine their vision, where they're going, and what projects that they need. So therefore, they've put a massive amount of projects together, which we wouldn't, at one person behind a wooden desk, would never be able to imagine if you're not living in that area. And it's not a small feat, you know, it's like getting all the states in the Middle East to work together. That's how it is getting farmers to work together. And yet they can do it themselves. They can really make a success of it. You can see, if you look at that cost per meter of R3.24 for a new fence or a fence that can last 50 years, the only way you'll get that right is if you use the community. If you're using our procurement systems, you'll be in excess of R100 a meter. So that's just basing each one of those farms. It's also based on a farm map. It's planning the biodiversity and the resources on that map, and it's the water and everything, and that farm plan is fitting into the bigger area plan. So if you look at our principles in land care, we're looking at integrated natural resource management, community-based and led, very important one. Sustainable livelihoods, obviously we must work towards the triple bottom line. Capacity building of the people in that area, looking at true partnerships, and then one of the most important things is blending upper level policy with ground up feedback. So you can take that area-wide planning, you can take their objectives, and you can take them all the way up to the Millennium Goals, like some of the other projects that we've already done. Showing a few partners that we used in that project. So let's have a look what the COPE has done. They had economic research done by the University of Cape Town, ecological biodiversity, jackal and caragol, 2 separate studies that were done by 2 PhD students. They've got another person looking at the baboon problem, and the ecological baboon, how they can work and live with that. The plant composition, Elmarie that spoke just now, she did that. Scanning project was done by our vets, and they were looking at what is the problem, because we have to go from the baseline. We're saying everything is predators. But you know, you're living, as you've just seen now, in a very harsh environment where it's very hot. Is there not some other reason why we have so low weaning percentage? Can't it be heat? Can it be jackal? Can it be management? Can it be cold? What can it be? So that project was done, and it was very successful, showing the farmers and actually introducing to them a very modern management field that should be there. Then we're having a look at the people. How did it improve the people? What is it that you can measure in the people in the Karoo? Maybe we should go to the farm worker's wife and measure the improvement in her life and that of the kids. So there were some studies done by UCT also on that, coming out with what is the difference that a project like this can do. Then there was a farm worker survey done by our Department of Agriculture. Obviously, we had a fencing project. It was one of the objectives to start the thing, and they put everything together. And in each farm that we took of the 19 farms, each farmer took part in that and assisted that everything happened. So we weren't paying for all these transitional costs. We were just paying for the nitty-gritty on the ground. Then there was a farm worker training project. Herd dogs were brought in, as well as many other methods of looking at management, of predator management. And then there was a lamb export cooperative that was put up. It didn't go a bit further, not too much further, but it's probably going into the Karoo lamb one, maybe with a newer study that we're doing in the Karoo. And then there was a study group formed. And can you believe it, in the middle of the Karoo, the person that was the first person, the chairperson of that study group, was one of the farmers' wives. I don't know why mine doesn't want to move now. Okay. So if we're scaling up, I can't see the top of my slide now, but if we're scaling up to 1 million hectares, there's a lot of things that we can take forward from what we had. But the most good plan that you could have is if you actually look at the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, and the sort of explanation behind it is to forge a global partnership to reverse and prevent desertification, land degradation, and to mitigate the effects of drought in affected areas in order to support poverty reduction and environmental sustainability. If you look at a project like this, it speaks directly to that. So it's very prominent as something that we would like to take further, and we've taken it to quite a few other areas, which I'll show you now. Right, so this is the COPE 4 area in Beaufort West. We're just about 50%, 60% finished with this area. This area is also 38 farmers. It is linked to the park, to the Karoo Park. So it's very involved with the Karoo Park and with all their management as well. And this project is also in its plan. It's linked itself to the Millennium Goals. It's also linked itself to the IDP within the municipality. So it is quite an effective project at the moment. Then you've got Nelspoort. This is the new one that we're going to start on with, which is about got about 300 kilometers of borderline fencing. It's about 267,000 hectares. There's another portion of it. It's in 2 portions in Beaufort West. So this is the one that we're working on at the moment that we're looking for funding for. Then you've got the Driehoeksfontein in Maritzburg. As you saw, this is more on the higher rainfall area. You can see it's broken up into a lot more areas, and hopefully we'll be getting there as soon as possible. And then the lower Buffels River in Maritzburg, which is also about 22,000 hectares. So if you look at our climate smart use, Dr. Mitchley spoke to us now, it's conservation agriculture, it's restoring ecological infrastructure. This is what we're talking about. It's integrated catchment management, or it's area-wide management of bigger areas. This is what we're doing. It's speaking directly into all of these projects, priority projects that we have in the Climate Smart project. This is just to give you a show that the Landcare and this project was taken to the Landcare conference, and it won an award over there. In fact, I think we won more awards than anybody else in the Landcare conference, and we're very proud of the team that we've got and the team that we took up. Also proud of going further with other projects. So it comes down to, what are we talking about? And it comes down to just the fact that you have to enable this. You have to enable this people on the ground to actually take control of this, and you have to feed these organizations. You can't just be a tourist. You have to feed them and maintain them, and that they go forward and they can do this work, and they can do it much better than we can do it from behind the desk. Thank you very much.
Everyone, my talk will be on determining the impacts of climate variability on vegetation and animal production in the western Upper Karoo shrublands of South Africa. In a changing environment where the levels of greenhouse gases have reached extreme levels, the impact of this on the climate of the Upper Karoo are not yet fully understood. Climate models typically predict that the rainfall will decrease by as much as 20% by the year 2080. And this current drought that we're experiencing in the Karoo at the moment are frequently ascribed to climate change. So this presentation aims to unpack long-term climatic variability and its impact that it has on vegetation and animal production in the western Upper Karoo shrublands. Greenhouse gases have reached extreme levels in the last decade, and how will this impact on vegetation and animal production in the Upper Karoo? We can see from this graph that it has clearly increased from 1950 levels up to where we are currently now. So what was the impact of these greenhouse gases that increased in extreme levels on the Nama Karoo? We have a few sites with long-term rainfall data starting in the 1930s, and here you can see the 3-year moving rainfall average deviation from the long-term rainfall average. We can see from the 1930s up to the end of the 1960s, they experienced quite a few droughts during this time period. Then all of them had this big rainfall event in 1974. It was for Richmond, Udall, Carnarvon and Fraserburg. And we can see after 1974 there were a few again drought years, but they also experienced quite good years, especially here from the 2000 upwards to where we are now. So our study area is located in the Northern Cape Province of South Africa. Here in green you can see on the map is where the Nama Karoo biome is located. We're working more here in the Upper Karoo, Western Upper Karoo area. Here's Carnarvon, here's Fraserburg. And this area has an average rainfall of 240 millimeters per annum. Working on a stocking density trial started back in 1988. There are 4 different stocking densities: a high stocking density at 4 hectares, recommended at 5.5, light at 7 hectares, and a very light at 8 hectares per small stock unit. There's a total of 12 animals per camp, and the site is managed on a free camp rotational grazing management system. Vegetation surveys were carried out at the start of the study in 1988. A second survey was carried out in 2010, and then a third vegetation survey carried out in 2016. So looking at the vegetation composition for these 3 surveys, we can see at the start in 1988, the most dominant species was Pensia spinescens, followed by Erysophilus spinescens, Rosinia, Rusia, Erysophilus erysioides, and Eniopogon desvauxi. So these are all Karoo shrubs. This is a grass species, and we could see that the Eniopogon desvauxi was quite low during this time in 1988, and as I said, dominated by Pensia spinescens. A few years later in 2010, when the survey was carried out again, Pentia spinescens saw a small drop from above 50% to just below 50% now, and the rest of the species percentage stayed more or less the same. The only increase that we saw was for Inyapogon des Vauxi, and this was across the entire trial. So this is for all the stocking density treatments, because we saw in another study carried out that there weren't any differences between the camps after 30 years. But interesting enough is we saw that Inyapogon was increasing, Pentia spinescens was decreasing. 2016, the third survey, we again saw Inyapogon is still increasing in their numbers, now above 20%. Here you saw it was less than 10%, now it's above 20%. And Pentia spinescens was still decreasing in numbers, closer to 40% now. So due to this drought that we're experiencing now at the moment, it was not possible to do another survey this year, because it's impossible to identify which of these species are still alive and which are not. But what's going to happen if we do receive good rains now in the next rainy season and we do the survey again in 2022? Are we still going to see this increase in Inyapogon des Vauxi and a decrease in Pentia spinescens? We're not sure. At the moment, it looks like most of the Pentia species did not make it through this long drought, 3-4 year drought that the Carnarvon area was experiencing, but we'll have to wait and see. There is cycles in this specific area. We can see, as I said, 1974 they had this big rainfall event, so it was a few years that they had above average annual rainfall, followed by a drought, another 5 to 6 year drought period, then another wet period, another 5 to 6 year in the start of the 1990s, and then they experienced quite a good rainy season up to 2015, and this is the current drought that we're experiencing at the moment. So, and this is when the surveys were carried out. So the first survey was carried out in 1988. It was in this quite wet period. 2010 was the second survey, so still in a very wet period. And 2016 was just before this drought that we're experiencing at the moment. So it will be interesting to see after this drought how it affected the species composition and which of the species will be dominating after such an intense drought. Because actually for these surveys, when they were carried out, the trial did not experience this intense drought before, especially under your heavier stocking density, to see if the heavier stocking density was maybe a bit too hard under this drought conditions. Okay, so we also have access to animal production data. The animals are weighed every 2 weeks. This was done from the day they started the trial back in 1988 till today. They weigh the animals every 2 weeks, and from that we can determine the animal weight gain and determine what's the deviation from the long-term average. So here in the bar showing, if it's red, it's the deviation. It was actually animal weight gain deviation loss, and if it's a green bar showing it was above the long-term average. And the blue line shows the rainfall that they received for that specific season. So we can see it more or less follow this pattern. When you have a very low rainfall year, you have a very low production, and the same going this side, especially this drought that we're going into now. We can see there's a big drop, the biggest drop, animal weight gain drop they saw during this 30 years was in 2019. Looked hard and tried to find temperature data. At the research station, they did record manually the temperature data from 1969 up to 1994, and from there we have a small period where we don't have any temperature data, and then an automatic station was set up here in 2008. But it's still interesting to compare this with the rainfall that they received at the rainfall station. We can see again here that big event in 1974, the high rainfall that they received, the temperatures dropped dramatically. it was 1.5 degrees cooler during that time compared to where we are today during this drought period, where we have an increase in temperature of 1.5 degrees Celsius. How does this all influence our rainfall across the site? The greenhouse gases, the increase in the temperatures, how does this impact on the rainfall? What's interesting, from the 1930s up till today, we see an increase over the last 80 years in the amount of rainfall. So there's probably an increase in temperature across the Karoo, but there's also an increase in our rainfall as well. We saw this for Richmond. They have an increase from the 1938s up to today of 71 millimeters more that they get per annum. Udale has the biggest increase. This is the most eastern site in the Upper Karoo. You have 112 millimeters per annum more compared to the 1930s. For Fraserburg, 64 millimeters increase, and Carnarvon, the most western site, we have a 31 millimeter increase. So with this increase in temperatures, we also see an increase in rainfall. Looking at the frost nights, the blue line shows the long-term average, how many frost nights they have per month. So the long-term average peaked here for 12 nights in July, and we can see they have frost nights from as early as April, and then the last frost nights here in October. What we see with the trend changing with the increase in temperatures for the last 10 years or so, we can see that they don't experience any frost nights during April anymore or during October, and there is a small decrease in the amount of frost nights that they do experience. Okay, and this shows now the long-term 3-year moving average rainfall for Carnarvon. It starts in 1929 up to 2020. It shows that the current drought that the Carnarvon area is experiencing isn't the first drought they have experienced before. We saw this in 1992, the 1980s, just after the big rainfall event in 74, and especially before 1974. This was a big, long time period where they experienced way below average annual rainfall. So this is not something new, and this is something that has been experienced previously in the Upper Karoo area. Okay, so to conclude, the results emanating from the study supports the school of thought that rising temperatures may be a driver for increased rainfall in the western Upper Karoo region. During below average rainfall seasons with the higher temperatures, the vegetation and sheep performance was significantly impacted, with lower animal performance and vegetation vigor experienced during these times. From this data, it is apparent that climatic variability, including the severe droughts, are an important part of the Upper Karoo region. It is therefore important for land users and land managers to take this into account in order to mitigate the effects thereof. Also, to guide on management options such as adapted breeds for this area, flexible stocking densities in these drought periods, definitely reducing animal numbers to ensure sustainable grazing management systems. Thank you very much.